Hey everybody, what's up? So this is going to be my review of Star Wars, aka Episode 4 A New Hope, even though it was called Star Wars when it first came out. And just like my reviews of the prequels, of course, I'm going to summarize the overall plot, then get into my pros and cons and some of the extra details, and then my conclusion. So Star Wars, aka Episode 4 A New Hope, begins with Princess Leia's ship being attacked by the Empire because the Empire is looking for the plans to their secret weapon, the Death Star. The stormtroopers come in, kill all the rebels, then Darth Vader comes in looking for the plans, Princess Leia is kidnapped, and then C-3PO and R2-D2, who of course had the Death Star plans, escape in an escape pod, crash land on Tatooine, and then run into Luke Skywalker, the main character. After that, Luke, 3PO, R2, and Obi-Wan Kenobi meet up with Chewbacca and Han Solo, and they go on a mission to return the Death Star plans to the rebels and save Princess Leia. And I don't think anyone will argue the immense impact and effect that this first movie had on cinema and film history. Not just because, it was one of the biggest blockbusters of the 20th century, but mostly because it revolutionized visual and special effects. It introduced so many realistic and likable characters, and it was so unlike any fantasy or science fiction film of the time, both like visual and story-wise. Not to mention, it was basically an independent movie that was, made with very little money, but enormous in scale. And I think, really, other than that, the main reason why this movie was so successful is because at the time when it was being made, nobody working on it thought it was going to be successful. Not even George Lucas himself. Like, if you've seen the documentary Empire of Dreams, George Lucas says multiple times that everybody, including his own cast and crew, was doubting him, doubting that the movie would be a success because they thought it just looked and felt like a kid's movie. It just looked like, some sort of fairy tale that, was going to bomb at the box office because at the time, most movies were more like very political driven and like more like thrillers and like movies, that were commenting on the society at the time, the social and political division of the 70s. So that's one of the reasons why George Lucas wanted to do something different with Star Wars, bring back that sense of movie magic that he grew up with, with classic adventure and fantasy stories like Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, Robin Hood. George Lucas has said multiple times that all those different sources were basically the inspiration for this movie. And he also said that other than the adventure fairy tale aspect of it, he also wanted it to have, political undertones. Like, he has said that his analogy with the Empire and the Rebels was sort of the Americans versus the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. So, like, that hodgepodge and mix of ideas made for a movie that was so successful, in my opinion, because a lot of people could relate to it and have fun with it because, it's taking real world ideas but setting them in a fantastical or fictional setting. And after 3PO and R2 crash land on Tatooine, they wander through the desert, are captured by Jawas, who are basically like the galaxy's little black market dealers because they just find droids randomly and then sell them. And then, of course, Luke and Uncle Owen buy 3PO and R2 to help out with Uncle Owen's moisture farm. R2 goes off by himself to look for Obi-Wan because of Leia's, message. And then they find him, get attacked by Tusken Raiders, and then Obi-Wan shows up and tells Luke about the Force. And what's great about those first few scenes is that, at the beginning of the movie, you don't really know too much of what's going on. You only have a little bit of context from that opening crawl, but what's one of many great things about this movie is that it just throws you into the action and you kind of have to piece together the plot yourself, But other than its visual appeal and structure, another one of the many things that made this movie so like huge when it came out and so well, praised and unique is the fact that it takes a lot of inspiration from the hero's journey, a concept that was created by philosopher Joseph Campbell, who was also a huge influence on this movie, and at one point actually taught George Lucas. So George Lucas obviously adopted a lot of his, philosophies and ideas into this movie, especially the hero's journey, because that's exactly what Luke's whole story throughout this trilogy is about. And a lot of that is because, in this movie, he starts out a very naive and, like, kind of like whiny kid who's sort of uncertain of himself. But of course, by the end of Return of the Jedi, he is certain of himself and has changed drastically from just an innocent farm boy to, a Jedi. And also another classic element of the hero's journey philosophy and idea that's in this movie is, of course, how the hero is trained by a wise old sage, an experienced mentor who, like, gives the hero guidance and wisdom in his time of need, and that's obviously Obi-Wan, and in Empire Strikes Back it's Yoda. And obviously, not only are the main characters an important part of the movie, but the supporting characters as well. Like, obviously, Han and Chewie, who are sort of the, pirate and first mate archetype, like they're smugglers and are sort of criminals who get thrown into this adventure, without even wanting to, like they're kind of forced into it. And of course, after Obi-Wan saves Luke from the Tusken Raiders, they watch Leia's distress message and then decide to go save her after, Luke's aunt and uncle are killed. But of course, they need a ship to get off the planet, and that's when they run into Han and Chewie in the cantina, which is such an iconic and memorable scene. Just, not just because of the look of it. The look of the cantina is so unique with all those different aliens and puppets, drinking. But it's also just like basically a dive bar, because like when somebody gets like shot or has an arm chopped off, like when Obi-Wan cuts off Ponda Bama's arm, they don't give a shit. They just go right back to their drinks. That comedy is also a great part about the cantina, and also visually it looks really unique. And then when they meet Han and Chewie, and Han basically tries to rip them off by saying, "I'm not going to take your dollar on unless you give me 10,000 credits." And Obi-Wan, being the great negotiator, that's my General Grievous impression for you. Obi-Wan, being the great negotiator that he is, says, "Okay, how about this? We'll give you 2,000 plus 15 or something like that. Yeah. So a total of 17 credits. We'll top that and give you 17 credits if you freaking take us now." Like Obi-Wan's like negotiating skills and also sense of humor in this movie is really great. Like, again, which is one of the reasons why I said that Ewan McGregor was so great as a young Obi-Wan, because he captures that, wisdom and humor. Another one of Obi-Wan's great funny moments in this movie is, when Han says, "You never heard of my ship? You never heard of the Millennium Falcon?" And Obi-Wan's just like, "Well, should I have?" Another great thing about the movie, that dialogue, the interaction between the characters is one of its many strengths. And also, what's great about the cantina scene is that it's a fantastic introduction for Han as a character, because, like, when you first meet him, just like Obi-Wan and Luke, you're not really sure if you should trust him. You're kind of hesitant to trust him, because at first he basically tries to rip off Obi-Wan and Luke by saying, "You're gonna have to pay me a lot in order for me to take you to this place." So you kind of get the vibe that, ooh, is he just gonna, like, lie to Obi-Wan and Luke? Is he a con man? That's what's great about Han in this movie in particular. Like, he's a great character, not just because you don't know if you should trust him, but also because he's not strictly a hero or a villain. What's great about Han in this movie is he's kind of an anti-hero. He definitely falls somewhere in the middle, because like he, is basically like mostly out for himself, he's a loner in that sense, like that's what makes him so cool and badass. And not just that, but of course, when he shoots Greedo first, I don't care about the stupid special edition change, which by the way, the special edition changes are my biggest con and flaw with all three of the original trilogy films. Why? Because while some of the special edition changes are good, most of them are just completely and utterly unnecessary. And I'm so glad that I managed to get the theatrical releases, from the 2006 limited edition DVDs, because they work so much better without those changes. Those changes were not necessary because, in my opinion, they just really take away from the experience of the movie. When you have all that obviously modern looking CGI throughout the entire movie, it takes you out of it because it wasn't there originally. And while granted, at least the changes don't alter the story of all three movies, they just take you out of the experience of it. All the original visual and special effects work just fine. Even the models, some of them aren't noticeable, yes, but again, just the hard work and talent that the visual and special effects artists put into this first movie, needs to be remembered and recognized. I mean, this movie won the Oscar for Best Visual and Special Effects, so that's saying something. And by adding in all those CGI alterations, it kind of disrespects the work that those visual and special effects artists did in this first movie. It really takes away from that and makes their effort look meaningless. Because CGI has just been done to death at this point. And while some of it can look cool and look really great for some movies, it's only going to look good if you combine it with things that are actually there. Rather than just having nothing when you're filming in camera. If you have absolutely nothing in camera and you're just surrounded by a blue screen and green screen, it just feels so artificial and is also like difficult for the actors because they're just working with nothing, which, yes, episodes 1, 2, and 3 did a lot of, but surprisingly there's more CGI in the sequel trilogy than the prequel trilogy, a fact that I recently learned and really surprised me. But anyway, no, the original visual and special effects work just fine with this movie. And the first time I watched the theatrical version of this movie, I was blown away. It was like watching it for the first time again, because I was watching it as it was in theaters, and I'm just like, all this works great without those changes. There was really no reason and purpose for those changes whatsoever. But anyway, sorry about going on a rant about the special editions there, even though I grew up with them. But anyway, again, back to the movie. So after Han and Chewie agree to take Luke, Obi-Wan, 3PO, and R2 to Alderaan, Luke has to, sell his speeder in order to afford it, and then an Imperial spy finds them, tells the stormtroopers on him, and they have to get the heck off Tatooine super fast. And then they go to Alderaan, and then the Death Star destroys Leia's home planet of Alderaan. And speaking of which, Tarkin, man. Governor Tarkin. Oh, he is such a great villain. Oh, just him in this one movie, man. He's such... How do I describe it? A very charming bad guy. One of my favorite Tarkin moments is when he famously says, "You may fire when ready." That accent, I don't know what it is about it that's just so fun. Once they get to the Death Star, that's when the real fun starts. Because, they hide in the floor of the Millennium Falcon, in these secret compartments, then beat up some stormtroopers, disguise themselves as stormtroopers, then take over one of the little communications rooms, find where Leia is being held captive and where the tractor beam is, and then that's where they split up. Obi-Wan goes off to shut down the tractor beam so that they can escape. And then Han, Chewie, and Luke go to find Leia. And then that's also where some of the great comedic moments ensue. Like when they go down to the cell bay, and like this one Imperial officer is just like, "Where are you going with this thing? You know, what are you doing with it?" And Luke's just like, "Prisoner transfer from cell block 1138." If you're a George Lucas fan, you'll know that reference. That was a reference to George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. And then they kill all those Imperial officers, and like one of them calls on the intercom, and Han's just like, "Everything's okay here. We're all fine. We're all perfectly normal. Everything's fine here. How are you?" And then shoots it, and then of course Luke gets Leia. Then all the stormtroopers show up, and they have this massive firefight. Obi-Wan shuts down the tractor beam, and then Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie have to like escape through the garbage chute because there's no other way out. And like, you know, 3PO and R2 have no idea what's going on because they're hiding from the stormtroopers. And then the famous trash compactor scene, like when the walls are closing in on them, they have to find something to like, you know, breach the walls, like keep them from closing in. And then of course after they all escape the trash compactor, like Leia gets so like pissy with them that they don't really have a plan, and like has no idea what they're doing there, like especially when she says, "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but from now on you do as I tell you, okay?" And then Han gets so pissed with her and says, "Look, your worshipfulness, let's get one thing straight. I take orders from just one person, me." Just like I said in my Attack of the Clones review, one of the greatest things about Han and Leia's romance is how it's so subtly well set up in this movie, in A New Hope. And then, of course, after they escape, Vader and Obi-Wan duel each other. Just like Luke in The Last Jedi, Obi-Wan sacrifices himself so that Luke can go on. But, of course, Obi-Wan ends up helping him later during the Battle of Yavin. Even though, again, that's one of my fewest flaws with the movie is the Battle of Yavin, because in my opinion it just goes on for too long. But like the final few minutes of it, like those final thrilling heart-pounding seconds when like Luke has to fire the missiles down the exhaust port, so intense, especially with the music and the editing. My god, those final few minutes of the battle are amazing. You know, I seriously envy, you know, kids who saw it in the theaters for the first time, because, and in general, people who got to see it in the theaters, man, because I can't imagine just how mind blown they were by this movie, because like I said, nobody thought it was going to be successful, including the people who were making it, and when it was, you know, it took the whole freaking world by storm, man. I just would have loved to be around at that time, you know, on May 25th, 1977, when it was released. And so, with all that said, I will give Star Wars, aka Episode 4, A New Hope, a friggin' great, or an A+. Alright, see you guys later. Bye.